I counted it afterward. 11 seconds. My hands were flat on the bench, palms down, eyes resting on a point somewhere between the defendant's table and the back wall. Not at either, just at the air between them, holding everything no one had said yet. The room was still the way rooms get still when everyone is waiting for something that cannot be taken back. 11 seconds. I have paused before rulings before. I have never paused that long. This is the case that earned that pause. Before I keep going, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever watched someone be failed by the very person whose only job was to be there, not let down by accident, failed by choice or by something close enough to choice that the difference stops mattering at 7:52 in the morning when you are sitting in a parking lot and your phone is in your hand and no one is calling back? Subscribe, because that question is the whole of this case and I want you here for the full answer. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. His name was Dr. Carson Whitfield, 47 years old at sentencing, a practicing oncologist in Columbus, Ohio, for 19 years. By most professional measures, a record any medical board would find satisfactory, until September 14, 2023, which is the date this story starts and also the date it broke something that could not be put back the way it was. Her name was Margaret Elkins. Everyone called her Maggie, 58 years old, a fifth-grade teacher in Westerville, Ohio, for 26 years. Diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer in April of 2023, 5 months before the appointment that was canceled. When she walked into my courtroom, she walked the way certain people walk when they have decided, somewhere private in themselves, to carry what is happening without making it a performance. She sat down carefully, set her hands in her lap, looked at the flag near the door before she looked anywhere else. That was not someone avoiding the room. That was someone steadying themselves before entering it fully. At one point during the proceedings, while the defense attorney was presenting paperwork, I watched Maggie reach into her bag and take out a small photograph. She looked at it for 3 or 4 seconds. Then she put it back. She did not show it to anyone. She did not explain it. She just looked and then continued. I do not know who was in that photograph. I still do not. But I knew what the gesture was. A person reminding themselves why they came. That belongs to the grace current of this story, even though I did not know yet this story had one. Dr. Whitfield sat at the defense table with the stillness of someone who had been quiet about something for a long time and was now in a room where that quiet was no longer available to him. He was not cold. I want to say that clearly before I say anything else about him. He was not cold. There was one moment during a recess when a court officer was speaking to him about something procedural, and he looked briefly out the window the way a person looks when they suddenly remember something specific and have nowhere to put it. 2 seconds. Then he looked back at his hands. I saw that from the bench. I wrote nothing about it, but I have thought about it many times since. Holding his humanity and the weight of what he had done at exactly the same time, that was the specific demand this case made of me that no other case had made quite the same way. I felt both of those things at once, and I did not know what to do with that. Not immediately. I worked it out slowly over weeks in the documents and the quiet after reading. Now let me tell you what happened. On September 13, 2023, Dr. Carson Whitfield left Columbus for a 9-day vacation in Cancun, Mexico. He had arranged for a colleague to cover his patient roster. The arrangement was informal, no written protocol. No formal patient notification system. His office would handle calls. His colleague would be available by phone. Margaret Elkins had a chemotherapy infusion scheduled for 9:15 a.m. on September 14th. This was not a routine check. This was a timed infusion of carboplatin and paclitaxel, a specific protocol timed to the cycle her body was in. She had rearranged her teaching schedule. Her daughter, Rebecca, had driven 3 hours from Cincinnati the night before to be there. Maggie had eaten the breakfast her infusion nurse said would help with the side effects. She had done everything she was supposed to do. At 7:52 a.m. on September 14th, a member of Dr. Whitfield's office staff called Maggie and told her the appointment was canceled. The covering physician could not perform the specific infusion. They would need to reschedule. The call lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I know this because the phone records were entered into evidence. Maggie and Rebecca drove to the office anyway. They sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes. Maggie said in testimony, "I just needed him to be there. That was all I needed." That sentence belongs entirely to the sorrow current. There is nothing in it that belongs anywhere else. I wrote it down and added nothing because nothing needed to be added. The rescheduled appointment came 22 days later. In those 22 days, Maggie's tumor markers shifted in a direction they had not shifted since her diagnosis. Her team changed her protocol. The new one was more aggressive, the side effects more significant, the treatment timeline extended by 4 months. Stage 3 had become a conversation about Stage 4 possibilities that had not existed before September 14th. Dr. Whitfield said in testimony, "I know I should have been there. I know that." That sentence belongs to the sorrow current. It is the sound of awareness arriving after the damage it could have prevented. If you are still with me, you have probably gone quiet. Whatever was around you when you started watching has faded a little. Your attention has narrowed to something specific and is staying there. Subscribe. That kind of attention deserves the rest of this story. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The case reached my bench through the Ohio Medical Board's referral process for patient harm resulting from professional conduct violations. In plain language, the medical board had already determined Dr. Whitfield's conduct fell below the standard of care owed to his patient. What I was asked to do was determine the proportionate consequence. That sounds narrow. It was not narrow. The case file was 312 pages. I opened it on a Sunday morning in October 2023. One of the first exhibits was a page from Maggie's patient chart, where her care coordinator had written on September 14th, "Appointment not completed. Physician unavailable." 5 words. In a medical chart, they carry a weight different from those same words anywhere else. I held that before I kept reading. One thing most people would not know about this process: Ohio's medical board referral system includes a mechanism called a structured impact assessment, which lets the court request a formal accounting of the direct medical consequences of the conduct in question. I requested it. The assessment, prepared by an independent clinical review panel, gave me a specific probability estimate of how the 22-day delay influenced the progression of Maggie's disease. Reading it in my chambers on a Tuesday afternoon in November was the moment the sorrow current ran at its fullest, but the same document contained a section I had not requested, patient response and resilience markers, noting that Maggie had continued teaching throughout treatment, maintained a student progress system during her chemotherapy weeks, and arranged a special class project for each absence. I did not expect to find that in a clinical assessment. That was the first moment the grace current entered this case. 2 things in one document, both real, both requiring something of me. Here is what I am offering. The rest of this story, told the same way I have been telling it, nothing held back, nothing resolved before it should be, nothing softened because softness is easier. Subscribe if that is what you want. I will keep going. The morning of the hearing, I watched both of them enter from the bench. Dr. Whitfield came in first in a dark gray suit, walking close to the wall, moving without hurry but without ease, a man whose body had not been resting well for 2 months. He sat down, placed a yellow legal pad on the table, and did not write anything on it for the first 20 minutes. A blank legal pad in a courtroom for 20 minutes is not nothing. It belonged to both Rivers, to the sorrow he was carrying, and to something I could not yet name. Maggie came in with Rebecca. Rebecca held her arm loosely, not the grip of someone steadying a fragile person, but 2 people who have walked beside each other long enough that holding on is no longer a conscious act. When Maggie reached her seat, she looked directly at the bench before she sat, not at Dr. Whitfield, at me. She held it for just a moment. I held it back. That belongs to the grace current. There is no other place for it. The defense presented 3 arguments. Procedural, the coverage arrangement met legal minimum standard. Contextual, a 22-day interval was within clinically acceptable scheduling variance. And a third, the one that surprised me, not strategically, humanly. Upon returning from Cancun, Dr. Whitfield had contacted Maggie's care team and voluntarily offered to continue her treatment at no additional cost for the full remainder of her protocol. Nobody required that. He had legal counsel and was in a defensive posture. And yet, there it was. He had come back and said, without being asked, "Let me stay. That belongs to the grace current." I held it there, even while everything else I was reading belonged somewhere else. What the defense could not resolve, honestly not with contempt, was the clinical impact assessment. No procedural or scheduling argument reaches what that document says. Dr. Whitfield did not try to argue against it. He said, "She deserves someone better than what I gave her that day. That belongs to the grace current. It is what a person says when they have stopped defending and started seeing." But the quote I wrote down, the one I looked at for a long time, came near the end of his testimony. He said, "I don't sleep the same way I used to. I don't think that's going away." I wrote it down. I looked at it for a long time. Both things I was feeling were in that one sentence. I did not expect that. The sorrow was in it. The permanent cost of what he had done, now living in him with no foreseeable end, and something else, a man who had arrived, slowly and at real cost, at the place where genuine accountability begins. Both rivers, one sentence. He said it. I wrote it down. I just realized, saying that out loud, that I have never put it into words before today. What it is to find both rivers in one sentence spoken by the person who caused the damage. Subscribe. That realization is going to matter more in a few minutes. Subscribe now. My father was sick for the last 3 years of his life. His cardiologist, a decent man, canceled 3 appointments in 18 months, not for vacations, for other urgencies. But the effect was the same each time. My father would put on his good shoes, the brown leather ones he always polished before a medical appointment, and sit in the chair by the front door for 20 minutes because he liked to be early. Then the phone would ring. I remember the sound of him walking back from the phone. I remember the specific sound of him setting his keys back on the hook, not dropping them, setting them carefully. He was a man who put things down with care and then went to sit somewhere quiet for a while without talking about it. I never asked him what those moments felt like, not once. I have thought about that many times since this case, about the cost of not having asked, and about how long a thing like that stays in the body. That is the memory this case lived beside in me. I do not need to explain why it belongs here. The convergence, the moment both rivers ran in the same sentence at the same time, was a letter. Maggie had written it by hand and submitted it through her attorney. 2 pages. I will not read it in full, but there is one sentence that belongs at the center of everything I have said today. She wrote, "I am not asking you to punish him for me. I am asking you to make sure this never happens to someone who doesn't know the right words to say in a parking lot at 8 in the morning." That sentence stopped me. It belonged to the sorrow current, the sorrow of a person who has been failed and knows others will be failed the same way, and it belonged to the grace current, a person who takes her own harm and turns it outward toward strangers, asking that they be protected. Both rivers, one sentence. From Maggie, who had every right to ask for something different and chose to ask for that. After I read that letter, I looked up from the page. Nobody noticed. But a woman in the 3rd row, a former patient of Dr. Whitfield's there to submit a character reference, was holding her own copy of the letter with both hands, reading slowly. She finished and did not look up. She just held the paper. That stillness, from the confluence place, told me something about the room no legal document had. I want to stop here for just a moment, not for effect, because what I just said about Maggie's letter is something I have not said out loud before today, and I need a second with it. Subscribe while I take that second. Subscribe and stay. Okay, let me keep going. I had decided carefully. 4 weeks of reading, thinking, rereading. I had decided knowing this ruling had to hold the full weight of what was lost and still leave room for what might be possible. Those 2 things do not always fit in the same ruling. In this case, they did. I had made sure they did. Dr. Whitfield had his hands folded on the still blank legal pad. Maggie sat upright 3 rows back, hands in her lap. Rebecca's hand rested on Maggie's arm. "I am ordering you to pay $180,000 in restitution. $130,000 to Margaret Elkins and her family for the direct additional medical costs from the delayed treatment and extended protocol. $50,000 to the Central Ohio Oncology Patient Advocacy Fund, which exists to ensure that patients who do not know the right words to say in a parking lot at 8 in the morning have someone standing with them who does. The money does not repair what was broken. It is an acknowledgement, made in the language this proceeding can speak, of the real and documented size of what was lost. I am also ordering 600 hours of direct patient service at the James Cancer Hospital and Solove Research Institute in Columbus, not administrative work, direct service, sitting with patients in waiting rooms, accompanying them to appointments, answering the phone when someone calls to ask what comes next. You know how to be in those rooms. I need you to go back into them differently than you left, not as the authority, but as the person whose only obligation is to be present. Every hour will be documented. You will be visible in this obligation the way Maggie was visible in that parking lot. I am also ordering 3 years of bi-monthly supervision with the Ohio Medical Board's Professional Conduct Ethics Panel. Not punishment alone, structure. The evidence showed a practice that had drifted over time from the human center of what it was supposed to be. This supervision brings that center back into view and keeps it there. And I'm ordering a formal written patient coverage protocol for your practice, developed with the Ohio Medical Board within 90 days, filed as a public record. Every covering physician signs it. Every patient is notified it exists. This document answers the question Maggie asked in her letter: what happens the next time a call comes in at 7:52 a.m.? It says the person in that parking lot will not wait 40 minutes to learn that nothing is coming. It has to say that. It has to mean it. If you complete 400 of the 600 service hours within the first 12 months, and the patient services coordinator at the James submits written attestation of your full and genuine participation, not compliant, genuine, the supervision period reduces from 3 years to 18 months. You will not have earned leniency. You will have earned the right to demonstrate something I am choosing right now to believe is true about you. I want you to understand the difference between those two things. You just heard what I said to him in that courtroom. Hold that. Subscribe before we go further, because what happened after I said it is the part I have thought about most. Subscribe now. I said one more thing. To Dr. Whitfield, to Maggie, to everyone in that room. What happened on September 14th, 2023 was a failure of presence, not of knowledge, not of skill, of presence. You were the person whose obligation required you to be there, and you did not make sure that obligation was covered, and a woman who had done everything right sat in a parking lot for 40 minutes waiting for something that was not coming. That cost her in real, documented, irreversible ways. This court will not treat that cost as small. Then I looked at Maggie. I said, I see what you brought into this room. I see how you carried it. What happened to you was not your fault, and what you chose to do with it, the letter, the composure, the way you turned your own harm toward people you will never meet, that is yours. Nobody required it. You made it. This court has seen it. Then I said to the room, we are each responsible for the person in the chair, not sometimes. The person in the chair came to the right place and trusted the right person, and the only adequate response to that trust is to be present, every time. That is what today is about. Then I said one sentence to no one in particular. A woman drove 3 hours to be in a parking lot. That is the fact this case will always be about. I closed the folder. The room settled into the other kind of still, not held breath, but the kind that comes after something everyone already felt has finally been said in plain language. Dr. Whitfield had his head down, his hand on the legal pad. He was writing something. I could not see what. He wrote for about 30 seconds and then stopped. His hand stayed on the page after the pen had stopped moving. I sat a moment before I stood. I put the cap back on my pen. That was all. Something small, physical, from both rivers at once. It asked nothing of anyone. The appeal, filed by Dr. Whitfield's medical liability insurer, not by Dr. Whitfield himself, was dismissed by the Ohio 10th District Court of Appeals on March 19, 2024. 4 months after sentencing, one-page ruling. When my clerk told me, I said thank you and went back to the document I was reading. That is the honest response, not performed relief, just the specific quiet of a decision that had been made and that was going to hold. On October 11, 2024, I received a letter from Rebecca Elkins. Her mother had gone back to her classroom for a full day on October 7th. Maggie's students did not know it was the last time. Maggie knew. She taught the full day, walked the room, looked at the work on the walls, said goodbye the way she always had. See you tomorrow. Have a good night. Don't forget your jacket. Rebecca did not explain why she was telling me. She did not need to. Both rivers were in that one day. Everything that had been lost and everything that had been chosen, present together in a classroom in Westerville, Ohio, on a Monday in October. What I know about this work is that the two feelings are always present, the weight of what was lost and the belief in what is still possible. What changes, case to case, is whether you are willing to hold both at full strength and rule from that place. This case required that completely. I have not entered the pause before a ruling in quite the same way since. I know what I am holding in those seconds now. I did not always know it this clearly. This case is where I learned. To anyone who recognizes the sorrow current in this story, who has sat in a parking lot, who has set keys back on a hook and gone to sit somewhere quiet, who has had to rebuild life around an absence that should not have been there, I saw it in Maggie's face when she walked in. I saw what it had cost her. I also saw, across those proceedings, something the sorrow did not erase. I saw her remain herself, fully, specifically herself, the way a person does when they have decided that what was done to them is not going to become the whole of who they are. I could not give back what was taken, but I could see her. I did see her. To anyone who recognizes the defendant's chair and who allowed something to drift, who is now sitting in the room with what that drift cost someone else, I watched Dr. Whitfield stay in that room for the full length of those proceedings. He did not minimize. He did not ask me to make the damage smaller than it was. He sat with it. In the distance between the person who does that and the person who does not, I have seen, over 22 years, almost everything that matters about what comes next. Stay in the room. That is all I know how to say. Stay. On October 7th, 2024, a woman looked at her students' work on the walls and said goodbye to them in the ordinary way. That is why I told you this story. Subscribe. Leave something in the comments, not an argument, not a verdict, just what you are carrying after watching this. That is a room for people willing to feel two things at once. You will find each other there.